Hey everyone, Mr. Hark here. A man sets up a couple of old CCTV cameras to protect his property during construction. One night, it shows a towering, human-shaped figure step into the edge of his property and then slip back. A few days later, the crew digs a septic line and hits something buried deep. What they pull out looks like bone clusters. Too big, primate-like, but wrong. They call the sheriff. Within hours, the site is fenced off, the bones are taken, and the owner is suddenly being pushed off his own land. That night, the camera picks up the figure again, this time returning to the exact spot where the bones were removed. So what exactly was buried out there, and why did something come back looking for it? If you want more, like, subscribe, and share this with a friend who doesn't believe. Alright, roll the story. If you ever end up buying a cheap piece of land in the woods because it seems like a good deal, I hope you remember this story before you sign anything. Because I did everything right, at least on paper. I pulled permits. I hired a licensed contractor. I paid my fees. I answered every letter. I was just a guy trying to build a small house and a workshop. And I still watched the state take that land like I had done something wrong. They never told me the full reason. Not officially. On paper, it looks clean. Environmental review, protected corridor, public interest, that kind of language. But I know the night it really changed. I know the moment that piece of dirt stopped belonging to me. It was the night something came back and found its dead gone. I know how that sounds. If I was listening to this 10 years ago, I'd probably roll my eyes and click away. Bigfoot, right? I get it. All I can tell you is this. I was a working electrician in my 30s. I didn't care about monsters or UFOs or any of that. My world was wire gauge, amperage, code compliance, and making sure I didn't get electrocuted. I wanted a quiet place, a fresh start, and room for my tools. And instead I ended up with a tape I can't show anyone without risking my life getting turned upside down again. So yeah, laugh if you want. I don't blame you, but listen to the whole thing before you decide what you think happened out there. At least do that much. I was mid-30s then, somewhere in that window where you're too old to be stupid but still young enough to think you can fix your life with a big decision. I had just come off a rough few years, divorce, some debt, a little bit of drinking, if I'm being honest. I was renting this cramped place in town, working long hours for a bigger outfit, always on someone else's schedule. There was this day where I was driving back from a job, and I passed by one of those little real estate signs, private land for sale. Owner financing. Cheap. I almost kept going, but I circled back. That's how it started. One little turn of the wheel. The parcel was a few miles outside Willow Creek. Dirt access road off a smaller road that most people never even notice. Half of it was overgrown. The other half had clearly been graded sometime years back and then left alone. You could still see the outline where somebody had planned something and then given up. You could smell the trees from the road, redwoods and damp earth. In town, people talk about getting away, but out there it felt like the air was actually clean enough to start over. The owner wanted out fast. Divorce on his end too. He'd stopped paying on his own loan, and if he didn't transfer it, he was going to lose it. I saw the numbers, did the math, and my brain just kept saying, you can swing this. Tight, but doable. Live small while you build. Do most of it yourself. So that's what I did. I signed. I went home that night and spread the papers on my kitchen table and stared at them like they were going to vanish. I had this stupid little grin I couldn't wipe off. For the first time in a long while, I thought, all right, maybe things are turning. Looking back, I can tell you the exact day I broke that ground. But I remember the day they dug that trench like it's burned in. It was late spring 1993. Because I'm not a general contractor, I did what everyone does out there. I hired one. A local guy, Rick Dyer. He wasn't some cowboy. Rick was one of those quiet, compact guys in his 40s, wore the same faded ball cap every day, knew every inspector by their first name. He'd point at a slope and tell you how the water was going to run before it ever rained. He came out, walked the property with me. We stood there with mud on our boots, looking at the rough clearing where the old owner had started something. You got decent bones here, he said. Couple of trees to take out. Cut a pad. House on that side, shop over here. Keep your truck turnaround clear. You'll want a slab, not a crawl space. This soil will eat posts. We talked numbers. I told him I'd pull my own electrical. His eyes lit up a little at that. Less paperwork for him. We shook hands. Because it was out of ways and there had been some thefts around there, Rick said something else on the second visit. "You should put eyes on this place," he told me. I thought he meant neighbors. "I don't know anybody out here," I said. He jerked his thumb toward his truck. He had 2 old black and white CCTV cameras rolling around in the bed, dusty but solid, and a couple of weathered metal posts. He said, "No, these kind of eyes." He'd had them from another job where the client never paid. Basic cameras, heavy little square things, hooked to a cheap time-lapse recorder. He said he'd let me have the setup for a good price, install it while they were doing form work. "Folks been walking off with generators, cement saws," he told me. "You don't want to lose a mixer out here. Cops won't do much, but if you got tape, sometimes it scares people off. And if not, at least you know who screwed you." I thought about my tools, my little investment. It made sense. It wasn't some paranoid thing, just practical. So he sunk those posts. One camera looking over where the foundation slab would be and where they parked the machinery. The other aimed out toward the tree line, more or less covering the edge of the clearing where the forest started. I ran power from a temporary panel into this little box in a used travel trailer I'd parked there to sleep in sometimes. The recorder sat on a shelf. It was one of those old time-lapse units that runs a full day on one tape if you set it right. The image wasn't great, but good enough to see trucks and faces. For the first couple of weeks, it did exactly what it should have done. Nothing. If you've never had cameras on a quiet patch of woods before, you'd be surprised how boring it looks once it's sped up. You mostly get nothing. Wind pushing the tops of the trees, shadows wandering around, a raccoon waddling into frame at 2 in the morning sniffing at the mixer, then leaving. Deer on the tree line, their eyes catching light and flaring white for a frame or two. Once in a while, a bird swoops through and looks gigantic because of the angle. I got in the habit of popping the tape out at night, taking it to my trailer, and letting it run while I made something simple to eat, just to check. Half the time I fell asleep with it whirring in the background. It made me feel like I was being responsible, like a real owner. That first sign that something was off was so small I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday. I only remember that because I had a job in town and came out to the property around dusk to make sure everything was locked up. The crew had already left. I grabbed the tape from the recorder, rolled it back to the morning, and watched the day scream by. Trucks coming in, guys moving around like ants, the sun sliding across the frame, then the clearing going empty. Light fading, floodlight kicking on. I almost stopped it there, but something about the way the light ended caught my eye. It was harsh. I'd mounted the lamp myself, one of those ugly but bright halogens on a pole. It threw this hard white cone, and then beyond that was just black. On that night, when the daytime sped by and the frame settled into that static night view, I saw the lamp flare a little, like something nudged the cable or the pole. Then, at the very edge of where the light died off, something stepped into view. If I had only seen it once, I would say it was a trick of the eye. The tape was grainy, the edges of the light were kind of fuzzy. But it wasn't one frame. It was about, 30 seconds of real time. You could see a shape, taller than any of my guys, dark from head to, whatever you call it, feet. No reflective vest, no hard hat, no shine from a tool. It came in slow from the right side, staying right at that border where you could just make out form but no features. The shoulders were wrong. Too wide. The arms hung lower than they should have, past where you would expect a hand to be. I leaned in, thinking bear. It would have made sense, but it wasn't moving like a bear. There was no four-legged drop, no sway of a big rear end. It was upright, step after step, like a man who'd spent his whole life walking that way. It moved along the edge of the light like it could see exactly where it ended. Then it stopped, like it turned its upper body a little toward the camera. The head tipped, almost like it was listening to something. The floodlight buzzed, or I imagined it did. A couple seconds passed, then it just eased backward. 1 step, 2, 3, and it was gone. Back into the dark. I rewound that section 3 times. Then again. I tried turning my little TV brightness up and down. I tried convincing myself it was a guy from one of the neighboring parcels, maybe checking out the job. But any neighbor that tall, that broad, I would have noticed. And there hadn't been any trucks, no footprint stronger than my guy's boots around there that day. My first feeling wasn't fear, it was embarrassment. Because the thought that crept into my head was, you're sitting here on a trailer sofa thinking you just taped Bigfoot. I caught myself laughing. Out loud. Alone. Then I made a copy. That might sound weird, but that's how my brain works. I back things up, I label stuff. It's what you do when you've had hard drives fail and job sites get broken into. I had a little stack of blank tapes. I marked the original with the date and daycam. Then I made a copy, wrote the same date in a small mark on the corner so I knew which was which, and stuck that copy in the cab of my truck. I told exactly one person about what I'd seen. Rick. I didn't launch into, hey, I filmed the monster. I just said, there's something weird on last night's tape. You want to look at it? He watched it once, squinting, his arms crossed. He watched it twice, leaning closer. He didn't say much. Just, that's big. We went outside after. He stood by the floodlight, looked back toward the trees, then kind of eyeballed where that border would be. You sure none of your buddies are messing with you? He asked. I shook my head. Nobody knows the cameras are even on except us. He shrugged, that slow, careful shrug you give when you don't want to commit to something. Probably a bear got curious, he said finally. The angle makes it look strange. We both knew that wasn't quite right, but he gave me that out, and I took it. We didn't call anybody. We didn't share the tape. We went back to talking about rebar schedules and delivery dates. The next morning the crew was back, and the job was just a job for a while again. If it had stopped there, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. You've probably heard people say the woods are quiet. They're not. They're busy. You've got birds, bugs, branches cracking, wind shushing through leaves. What they really mean when they say it's quiet is that there's nobody to answer if something goes wrong. That thought didn't really hit me until the day the excavator bucket hit something it shouldn't have. We were finally at the septic stage. Rick had laid out the trench. The big machine operator, a guy named Tom, was taking slow bites across the flagged line. Clay, rocks, clods of dark earth going up and over, thumping into a pile. I was there that day partly because I was excited to see some real progress, partly because, again, I was trying to be a responsible owner. I was off to the side with a clipboard, making notes about where the main would run. I remember a change in the sound first. The bucket hit something that wasn't rock but wasn't soft soil either. You can hear it if you know machines. That kind of muffled chunk. Tom eased back on the controls, frowned, then took another shallow bite. On the second pass, the bucket scraped through this patch of darker soil, almost like a vein. Something pale rolled free and tumbled down the slope of the trench. It wasn't dramatic at first. Nobody screamed or anything. It just dropped out of the dirt and landed on a ledge of crumbly soil. About the size of my forearm, curved a little, jointed. It looked like a bone. We get animal bones out there sometimes. Deer, cattle from old homesteads. You kick them out of the way. It should have been like that. But this thing was wrong, too long, too thick. The structure of it. There were segments like metatarsals but stretched, and at the end, smaller pieces that could have been toes. Only each one was like a cigar, thicker around than my thumb. Tom cut the engine without needing to be told. The sudden silence dropped with the same heaviness as the stopped machine. You could hear the floodplain birds off somewhere, and then even that seemed to go away. Rick climbed down slow. He slid into the trench and crouched near the exposed soil. I followed, my boots sliding in the loose dirt. The soil in that band was darker, tighter packed than the stuff above, like someone had filled that trench on purpose, then time had packed it down. Rick didn't touch anything at first. He just looked. His lips pressed together. He reached out with the end of a flag marker and gently nudged the thing that had rolled out, turning it a little. It had that dried look, not fresh, not greasy, but it held together. There was another piece just visible deeper in the cut, thicker, shaped like a hand if you took a hand and blew it up and stripped it down to bone. Human? I asked. I don't know why I whispered, but I did. Rick said, I don't know. Could be some old burial. I'm not guessing. He straightened up. Everybody out of the trench, he said louder. Nobody touches anything. Tom, kill it. Evan, called the sheriff. Now. That's when it shifted. It stopped being my build and started being a scene. Deputy Linda Reyes was the one who came out. I remember that clearly because she was calm. No cowboy nonsense. She pulled in alone in the county car, parked where we pointed, and walked over with that deliberate step cops have when they don't know what they're walking into yet, but they're choosing to act like they do. She listened. She took it all in. She had us show her the trench, the first bone, the darker soil. She didn't roll her eyes or downplay it. She put on gloves, climbed in, crouched just like Rick had. She took a long look. Then she went back to her car and got her camera and a little packet of flags. She documented it like it was the real thing. Photos from above, from the side. Numbered flags stuck around the exposed area, each one pushed in gently. She bagged the bit that had rolled free and a couple of smaller fragments from the edge, sealed them, labeled them. She took our statements separately, asked the same questions in slightly different ways, like she was looking for cracks. Who dug? Who was here? Who touched what? How deep? How long since this soil had been disturbed? All the while, I was stuck in that narrow place between fear and inconvenience. Part of my brain was going, oh God, what if it's a body? What if this is a missing person? What if I've been building over a crime scene? The other part was selfish. How long is this going to delay the job? What does this do to my budget? What if they shut me down? I didn't mention the camera tape, not then. It didn't feel like it belonged in the same conversation. We didn't know what the bones were yet. You don't jump from possible burial to monster out loud. Then there was this moment where everything changed and none of the words said reflected it. She had been professional, almost routine. Then she asked Tom to hop into the trench again and scrape a little more off to one side, just a thin cut, so she could see if there were more bones or if it was a single thing. He did. The bucket shaved a thin layer and another piece slid out. Bigger. A broad, flattish plate with projections. Maybe part of a pelvis, if that's what you wanted to see, but scaled up. Edges worn, but intact enough you could feel it was all one thing. Linda stepped down again, stood there looking at it. She didn't say anything, she didn't gasp, but her whole face went still. Like she'd just been holding her expression on a hook and someone cut the string. You could see her recalculating. Not a deputy at a possible old burial. A person standing over something that didn't fit any box she knew. She climbed out, wiped her gloves carefully, stripped them off, and walked to her car. This time she got on her radio, but she didn't do it in front of us. She shut the door. We could see her talking, gesturing a little. It took longer than you'd expect for a simple call. When she came back, she said, "All right, we're going to freeze the site for now. I need you all to stay off this trench. No digging, no filling, no moving anything." She looked at me. "Mr. Mercer, this is your property. You're going to see some vehicles out here. Don't stop them. Don't touch the flags. Just leave this exact area alone until you hear otherwise." "Understood?" I asked. "Is it human?" She hesitated a fraction of a second, then she said, "We don't know yet. We're waiting on guidance." Guidance. That was the word she used. It would stick in my head for a long time. Guidance came faster than I would have thought possible. We were maybe 2 hours out from Linda's arrival, still hovering around the site like we were orbiting a little gravity well, when a white truck pulled in, then another behind it, unmarked but with that government look. Clean, antenna, no company logo. Out stepped a man in a uniform I recognized but had never had reason to deal with. State Wildlife. "Name tag," said Morrison. "Cal." He shook hands all around, introduced himself, did that thing where he smiled with his mouth but not his eyes. "I'm here in a supportive capacity," he said. "Just making sure we do this right for everybody's safety." Everybody's safety. Over some old bones buried deep in my soil. He made a show of walking the perimeter. He looked at the trench from above, didn't climb in. He talked with Linda off to the side, quiet but intense. She did more listening than talking. There was another guy with him who never gave his name, just stood back watching. After a while, they came over to me. "Mr. Mercer," Cal said, "from what we're seeing, this may involve sensitive material, potentially protected species, potentially a public safety concern. We're going to have to classify this area as restricted for the time being while we evaluate." "Protected species," I said. "Like animal?" He gave me one of those non-answers. "We don't want rumors flying around before we know what we're dealing with. I understand you have recording equipment on site." That made my stomach tighten. Just some basic cameras, I said. For theft. Why? Any footage of wildlife in the area could be helpful for our documentation, he said. Still in that smooth tone, you'd be doing us a favor. We'll log it, give you a receipt, and you'll be helping the investigation. It's standard. He said standard like he practiced the word. I glanced at Rick. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with this tight jaw that said, be careful. I thought about telling Cal no, that they were for my own security, that I didn't owe the state my tapes, but I also thought about my permits, my schedule, the fact that this guy could probably make my life very hard with one phone call. So I said, I can give you last night's tape. I have it in the trailer. I did not say anything about the copy in the truck. I handed him the original. He put it in a padded envelope, wrote something on the front, and then handed me a carbon slip with a number on it. For your records, he said. I remember that moment clear as day. The weight of the tape leaving my hand. It felt like I was giving away more than plastic. By the next morning, my job site was wrapped in a whole new skin. They came early, before I even got out there. Some temporary fencing panels showed up, installed by a crew that wasn't mine. They wrapped them around the trench area first, then widened the perimeter over a couple of days until a third of my parcel was inside this flimsy-looking cage with bright warning placards. Restricted area. Authorized personnel only. Contact number with a state seal. None of them mentioned bones. None of them mentioned species. Just bureaucratic phrases. The county called Rick and told him all work was paused on that portion of the project pending review. They didn't say what kind of review, just that his inspections were rescheduled. They didn't give a new date. He came by my place in the evening, hat in his hands, and told me straight. Look, Evan, he said, I've got other jobs lined up. I can't sit on my guys for weeks waiting on somebody in Sacramento to clear a trench. I'll keep your forms covered so they don't rot, but I need to be honest. If this drags on, I might have to step back. I couldn't even be mad at him. He had a family, employees. I just nodded and felt that little knot in my gut tighten another notch. The neighbors, the ones I'd barely met, started acting different too. There's a way people look at you when something official is happening on your property, kind of sideways, like they're trying to see if trouble sticks to you or if you're just in the blast radius. One guy from down the road, friendly as can be the week before, suddenly got vague when I asked if he'd seen the state trucks go by. I heard they're doing something up there, he said. State's involved. That's all I know, like that was supposed to explain everything. That night, I sat in my trailer staring at the spot where the tape deck usually sat, empty shelf. The other tape, the copy, was in a drawer under the passenger seat of my truck, wrapped in an old shirt. I'd checked 3 times just to make sure it was still there. That's when I made my second real mistake. I thought the thing I had to worry about most was what was happening above ground. The night the thing came back, I almost wasn't there. I had work in town the next morning. I could have gone home, slept in a real bed. But the forecast said rain, and I knew we had some lumber stacked too close to where the runoff usually went. Last thing I needed was half my framing warped before we even stood it up. Rick was still on the job then, and he'd called to say he'd try to swing by too, cover what we could, make sure the tarps were tight. So there we were, 2 tired men in our 30s and 40s, stomping around in the dark with flashlights and curses, wrestling blue tarps over stacks of wood, checking the straps on the mixer, making sure the generator was chained. The floodlight was on, buzzing faintly. The cameras were running. The temporary fence around the trench looked stupid and small in that big clearing, these little metal grids trying to tell the forest where not to go. I remember exactly the feel of the air that night. Heavy but not raining yet. That weird hang, like the sky is waiting to drop a bucket on you. You could smell the wet coming. The dirt under our boots was just starting to go from dust to tacky. Rick was by the lumber stack, cussing at a stubborn tarp grommet. I was closer to the trailer, coiling an extension cord. For noise, we had our boots, the flap of plastic, the hum of a light, and off somewhere, a couple of frogs complaining about the weather. Normal stuff. Then the owls shut up. You don't realize how much background noise you're living in until it stops. The frogs, the distant night birds, all of it just cut off. It was so sudden that I paused with the cord in my hand and looked up, like I'd hear what replaced it. What I heard was my own breathing, way louder than it should have been. The hum of the floodlight, the little ticking sound metal makes when it's cooling, and under that, so low at first I wasn't sure, something like a vibration. "Rick," I called. He was maybe 20 yards away, at the edge of the light. He turned his flashlight off without me telling him. That was instinct. If you've ever worked nights, you know. If something's out there, you don't blind yourself. "You hear that?" he asked. At first I thought it was thunder, way off. But there were no flashes, no rolling echo. It was more here, in my chest, in my teeth. Then it rose up and became a sound. I have tried for years to describe it in a way that doesn't sound like I'm making it bigger for effect. All I can say is, it wasn't a bear roar. It was deep enough that you felt it before your ears sorted it out. Rough, like it had gravel in it. It started low, climbed a little, then broke off. It came from the tree line, not far. Maybe 30, 40 yards past the edge of the light. I froze. Rick froze. Neither of us said what the hell was that because we both knew that question would make it too real. Instead, he said, "Get in the trailer." His voice was calm, but it had that tightness around the edges. I backed toward the trailer door, still holding the cord. I couldn't take my eyes off the dark beyond the floodlight. Part of me was hoping, almost begging, to see the shape of a bear, a truck, anything familiar step into the spill. Nothing did. It stayed black. The second sound was worse. It wasn't as loud. It was more like a broken moan. I know how that sounds. But that's what it was. A noise that started like it wanted to be a roar and then collapsed into itself. There was something about it that was wrong in a way that had nothing to do with monsters. It sounded hurt. I made it to the trailer door, put my hand on the metal. It felt clammy. Rick was closer to the trench fence, his flashlight still off, just standing there, listening. "What if it's a person?" I asked, because my brain still wanted a human answer. "That's no person," he said, almost under his breath. Then, for the first time, something moved at the edge of the light. If you've ever watched an animal circle a camp, you know how they test that border. In and out, just enough for you to catch motion but not form. This wasn't like that. This thing stepped in hard. I saw it on the live view before I saw it with my naked eyes, if that makes sense. The recorder had a small monitor. It showed both camera feeds split, one looking over the pad and gear, one pointed toward the tree line and the fenced trench. When that first bellow hit us, I'd backed to the trailer, and I was half facing the door, half facing the monitor, so when something burst into the lower frame, it was a double hit. My eyes and the little black and white screen both yanked my attention to the same place. It came in from the right side again, but not slow this time. A big, dark shape, shoulders hunched forward, arms out from its sides like it was ready to grab or shove. It moved with this heavy, ground-eating stride, each step kicking up wet dirt. It went straight for the fence trench. On the monitor, the floodlight washed out some detail, but you could see enough. It was tall, taller than that temporary fence by a good couple feet. The top rail hit it around mid-chest. The head was rounded. There was no shine from clothes, no reflection of a belt buckle or tools. It didn't hesitate at the fence. It hit it with both hands, fingers I could not quite see wrapping around the top, and just shoved it aside like it weighed nothing. The panels clanged together, one of them tipping. Rick swore. It was more like a breath than a word. He took one step back, then another. I should have ducked inside. I should have shut the door and hid like a sane man. But something about seeing that fence go like a toy snapped a wire in my brain. Because I knew what was in that fenced area. I knew what they had taken away earlier that day. The thing dropped to its knees, or at least down low enough that its upper body leaned over the churned earth of the trench. Even from where I stood, maybe 30 yards away, I could hear it. Not words, not anything like that. Just breath, harsh, fast. It raked its hands through the dirt, dragging long sweeps, clawing like it was trying to grab something that wasn't there anymore. Mud flew. Clods hit the remaining fence, hit the stacks of lumber on the far side, hit the old stump we left by the edge. You could see the arcs of wet soil in the floodlight. It kept doing that, frantic, back and forth, throw, drag, throw. Every few seconds it would stop and let out that low, broken sound again. Not a roar now, something else. Something smaller and, in a way, worse. Rick had stopped moving. It was like we both understood at the same exact moment what we were watching, even if we didn't have words for it yet. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't posturing. It was looking for something. The bones. The realization dropped into me like a stone. The bucket. The darker soil. The careful layer. 14 years, the letter would say later. 14 years they'd been down there. And then in one day, we dug them out, bagged them, hauled them off like crime scene evidence. The thing in my clearing had come back to where those bones should have been, and they were gone. It scraped and clawed and pulled until its hands hit the old, undisturbed soil at the bottom of the trench. Then it stopped. It stayed there for a second, hunched over, hands sunk into the earth. The floodlight cut a hard line across its back. You could see the rise and fall of its chest. You could see the damp on its shoulders where the moisture in the air was catching on whatever hair or fur covered it. Then it rocked back on its heels and, stilled, it lowered its head in this slow, deliberate way. Not like an animal sniffing, more like someone looking at a grave. It didn't move for, 20 seconds? 30? Long enough for my brain to start shouting at me to breathe again. Then it pushed itself up, not in a rush. It stood there on 2 feet in the ruined trench, turned its head, and looked toward the lights. Not at me exactly, at the general direction of the site. The mixer, the posts, the trailer. I couldn't see eyes. I could see the dark oval of a face, no shine of teeth, no open mouth. Just the impression of something taking us in, cataloging us. And then, just when I thought it might cross that last distance and come right through the side of the trailer, it did something I didn't expect. It stepped back, 1 step, 2, then it turned away, shoulders still tight, head still low, and walked back toward the tree line. Not ran, not loped. Walked, big solid steps. It pushed through some brush, snapped a branch without seeming to notice, and in about 5 seconds it was gone beyond the reach of the floodlight. The sound stopped with it. The air seemed to loosen. Somewhere far off, a frog croaked once in this tentative way, like it was checking if it was allowed. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then Rick said very quietly, "It wasn't after us," and I knew he was right. I didn't sleep that night. I don't mean I tossed and turned. I mean I did not close my eyes unless I had to blink, and even that felt risky. We shut down everything and left earlier than we should have. We didn't look back at the tree line. We didn't talk much. Our boots made these deep prints in the softening dirt, and part of me was afraid to look beside them in case something else had walked in step with us. When I got back to the rental in town, I locked the door, pulled the curtains, and set that copy tape on the coffee table in front of me. I stared at it like it was a live grenade. I knew what was on it. I'd seen it happen, but my brain still needed something. Confirmation that it wasn't just panic and shadows. So a little after midnight, hands shaking more than I'll admit, I slid it into the VCR and hit play. I watched the whole day blow by. The trench, the fence, Rick's truck, my old pickup, the light fading, us wrestling tarps. Then I watched myself on screen freeze, half crouched by the trailer door, head turned toward the tree line. Even knowing what was coming, my heart rate jumped. The first bellow didn't translate perfectly on tape. It sounded thinner, higher, like the low end got cut off. But you could still feel it in the way the picture shook slightly, as if the camera shared our flinch, and then there it was. Exactly the way I'd seen it, only somehow worse, because now I could rewind and freeze and see how big it really was. That shape bursting into the edge of the floodlight spill. Those arms, that width, the way it hit the fence without slowing, panels jerking sideways like paper, the frantic clawing at the trench, the flying mud, the choked noises, the stillness when it realized the bones were gone. None of it looked like a man in a suit. I know that's where everybody's mind goes. Mine did too. I tried every angle I could. I told myself maybe a hunter, big guy in heavy clothing. Maybe the camera distorted his proportions. Maybe the light did something weird. But no hunter I have ever met moves with that kind of weight, that kind of efficient, unthinking power. No human glides back into the trees like their feet and the ground know each other that well. I let it play 3 times. Then I stopped, rewound it, labeled it clearly, and put it somewhere I won't tell you about. That was the last calm night I had for a long while. The next couple of weeks were a different kind of horror. Nothing came charging out of the tree line again. No more bellows, no midnight scratches at the trailer door. Whatever that thing was, it got its answer that night. What came at me instead was paper. Letters, calls, visits. The county dragged their feet on everything. Inspections that had been scheduled for weeks suddenly had missing documentation. The septic approval went from in process to under review to denied pending further environmental assessment. When I called to ask what that meant, I got bounced between departments. One person said they were waiting for reports from the state. Another said there was a possible protected corridor designation in the works. Someone else mentioned endangered habitat but couldn't specify for what. I hired a lawyer. That'll tell you how serious it felt to me. I'm not a guy who likes paying professionals if I can avoid it, but I was in over my head. He looked at the letters, the timelines, the notes I'd made and said, "They're boxing you in. If this was just a routine issue, they'd tell you exactly what form to file. They're not doing that. They're creating friction." "Why?" I asked. He spread his hands. "Could be they really are planning a corridor and your piece is in the way. Could be something turned up on that trench that scared somebody higher up. Either way, fighting it will cost you more than the land is worth, unless you want to make this your full-time job for the next 5 years. 5 years. I had bills due in 30 days. Meanwhile, the state people kept showing up. Never with friendly knock and chat. They'd park by the gate, walk the fence line, clipboards out. Sometimes they'd unlock the temporary gate around the old trench area and go in, without me. More than once I'd drive up and see fresh tire tracks that weren't mine or Rick's, different tread, wider spacing. They never left a note. They never missed an opportunity to remind me, when I did catch them, that the restricted zone was not to be altered. One afternoon I saw someone I recognized in that crowd, Deputy Linda. She wasn't in uniform that day. She was coming out as I was pulling in, and she made sure she was alone by the time I parked. She met me by the mailbox, away from the trailers and the fence and the other eyes. "You all right?" she asked. I laughed. It came out harsher than I meant. "Not really. Are you allowed to tell me anything?" "Because nobody else is." She looked tired, older than the first time I'd seen her, even though only a few weeks had passed. "The report on those remains," she said quietly, "went above the county. I made the call, and then it was like someone shut a door. I can't even access the file anymore." "You're the one who found them," I said. "That doesn't seem right." She shrugged, but it was stiff, angry. "I'm not supposed to be talking to you about this off the record," she said, "so I won't. But I will say, for your own sake, if you have anything you haven't handed over yet, be careful who you show it to." That stopped me cold. "You know about the tape?" I asked. She shook her head once. "I know they asked about it, and I know they were very interested in being the only ones to see it." She started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "Evan," she said, "not everything that happens out here gets written down. Remember that." Then she got in her car and drove off. It was as close to a warning as she could give me without putting it in writing. That night I slept with the tape under my bed. It wasn't just officials that made life hard. Real life did its part too. The bank didn't care about restricted zones or potential corridors. They wanted payments. Every month. The material sitting out there didn't care either. Rain warped what we couldn't get fully covered. Tarps tore, mold crept in. Rick, true to his word, hung in as long as he could. But eventually he came by one morning, hat in hand again, and said, "I can't, man. I'm sorry. They're asking questions about my other jobs now. Permits that were fine last year suddenly need extra forms. Someone's turned a light on me and I don't want to find out how bright it gets." He offered to put me in touch with another contractor in a different county, someone who might be willing to step in if things cleared. It was like talking about a fantasy project. The ground we stood on felt more like a liability than anything else. The only clear, solid thing I had, ironically, was that tape, and even that was starting to feel like a curse instead of evidence. I did try to get outside opinions on the bones early on, before the letter came. I called a contact at a university. I called 2 private labs I found through a friend of a friend. I gave them the general outline: old remains dug on private land, unusual size, sheriff took them, possible misclassification. Could they, in theory, evaluate if I could obtain samples? Every single one of them said some version of the same thing. Without chain of custody, they couldn't touch it. Without a clear release from the authorities, they couldn't touch it. And besides, if the material was already in state hands, it was already on a path they couldn't step into without stepping on somebody powerful's toes. One guy, braver than the rest, sighed and said, "Look, if it's just some old animal, it'll show up in a journal someday, and you'll get your apology then." If it's not, you really think we get to see it? That's when I realized something I should have understood the moment Cal took that first tape from my hand. Whatever those bones were, they were never coming back to me. Not as evidence, not as closure. They'd been swallowed. The only thing nobody knew I still had was the footage. And now, thanks to Linda's warning, I understood what that meant. It meant I had something I wasn't supposed to have. It meant I held a live wire. The official letter came about a month after the trench incident. It was thin, just a couple of pages. The envelope had a state seal on it, the kind that tries to look reassuring and ends up feeling more like a stamp of inevitability. It did not say Bigfoot. Of course it didn't. It said the sample was mammalian, with unusual morphology consistent with a primate-like structure. It said the estimated time since death was approximately 14 years. It said no match had been found in reference records. It did not include photographs. It did not include diagrams. It did not name a species. It did not list any next steps for me. It ended with a recommendation that the area containing the discovery remain restricted pending further review. Further review by who? It did not specify. I read it 3 times. I wanted to be relieved that they hadn't accused me of anything. No mention of criminal investigation. No hint that I was under suspicion. But the relief was thin. Underneath it was something else. A feeling that I had just watched someone draw a curtain across a stage and tell me the show was over, even though I hadn't seen the end. You might think I went to the media then, called a reporter, sent copies to every paranormal show I could find. I didn't. I didn't because I still had to live a life, pay bills, work jobs, keep my name from being a joke. And because every time I even thought about putting that tape in the mail to someone, I remembered the way that thing had dropped to its knees and torn at the earth. That sound it made when its hands came up empty. It's hard to explain, but somewhere along the line, the fear I had started with changed shape. The first days, it was all about me. Me getting hurt. Me being seen as crazy. Me losing my land, my money. After I watched that rage footage a few times, something else dug in. Guilt. The storms came through, just like they always do out there. Big Pacific systems rolling in, dropping curtains of water that turned the dirt road into a rutted mess and my cleared pad into a shallow, muddy lake. The trench area drained okay, it had better, given how deep it was, but the surface turned slick. I was out there as much as I could be, even though almost nothing productive was happening, partly because I was stubborn, partly because I wanted to keep an eye on who came and went. After one particularly hard rain, I walked the property line, hood up, hands stuffed in my jacket. The temporary fence around the trench had been reinforced. New locks. New signs warning of fines for trespassing. The disturbed soil inside had settled some. The top layer looked more uniform now. Whatever bones had been left behind, if any, were long gone. That's when I saw the first track. It was just outside the restricted area, in a patch of softer mud where some runoff had pooled. Not mine. Not Rick's. Too wide, too long, bare. I know what a human barefoot print looks like. I've seen my own enough times on wet concrete, on plywood. 5 toes, ball, arch, heel. About 11 or 12 inches long in my case. This thing was bigger. The heel alone was as wide across as my palm. The overall length would have gone from my fingertips to halfway up my forearm. The toes splayed a little, like they had room to move. Each one left its own distinct impression. It was deep. Deeper than my boot prints near it, and I'm not a small man. I stood there in the drizzle, water trickling off my hood, and just stared at it. I didn't call anyone over. There was no one to call. The crews were gone. The officials wouldn't have cared. I followed it with my eyes. There were more prints, not in a straight line but looping. They made a rough circle around the restricted zone, never crossing the fence line. Always just outside it, circling. The hair rose on the back of my neck. Not because I felt watched, but because I realized something simple and awful. Whatever had come back that night had been back again, maybe more than once, and it had been careful. It hadn't banged on my trailer. It hadn't thrown anything at the mixer. It had walked around this patch of ground like someone pacing outside a locked door. It took me a minute to realize I was holding my breath again. On another day, after another storm, I found something else. The soil inside the restricted fence had taken on that slightly crusted look wet dirt gets when it dries. On top of that, near the center of where the original trench had been, someone had arranged branches. Not fallen ones, snapped ones. Fresh breaks, pale inside, laid in a pattern, no more than a couple feet across. All the tips pointing inward. It wasn't art, not like a person would make. It wasn't random either. I don't know how to explain it except to say it looked like a mark. A sign saying, "This spot, here." I didn't see anyone make it. I didn't see anyone take it down. But the next time the state trucks came, the branches were gone. Nobody mentioned them. I stopped telling anyone what I found. I tried, one last time, to fight back the normal way. My lawyer drafted letters. We filed appeals. We asked for clarification on the environmental corridor designation, on the basis for the denial of my septic permit, on the legal grounds for effectively seizing functional use of a large part of my parcel without compensation. For a while, it was just more paper, more form letters, more pending review. Then one day, a different kind of envelope showed up. Not county this time, state. It laid everything out in clean, polite phrases. The parcel I owned, it said, sat within a proposed protected corridor. The biological significance of the area, combined with the recent discovery of unusual remains, made it a candidate for acquisition in the public interest. They offered to buy me out. On paper, it wasn't an insult. They calculated market value based on comparable parcels. The number would have looked generous to someone who hadn't poured money into grading, materials, permits, and time. To me, it barely covered what I'd already put in. It didn't touch the hours of labor, the interest on the loan, the cost of lost work while I ran around trying to keep this thing afloat. I showed it to my lawyer. His face told me what his words were about to. "Can we fight it?" I asked. "Sure," he said. "We can fight anything. The question is, can you afford to? How long?" He didn't sugarcoat it. Years. And even if you win, all you win is the right to keep paying on land you can't build on while they slow roll you every step of the way. "So what's my choice?" I asked, even though I already knew. "You can sign," he said. "Or you can let it get taken in a quieter, uglier way. Liens, fines, denials." He paused. "Evan," he said, "sometimes they make it so the only winning move is to walk away before they break you." I sat in my truck that afternoon, the buyout paperwork in my lap, and stared through the windshield at what was supposed to be my future. The pad was half overgrown again, weeds pushing through the gravel, the form boards warping. The temporary fence around the trench spot looked more permanent with every fresh sign they zip-tied to it. Somebody had left a new lock on the main gate. Not mine. Shiny metal against old chain. They were already acting like it was theirs. In the end, I did what most people do when it's them against the machine. I signed. There was a clause in the transfer documents about confidentiality. It wasn't dramatic, no threats. Just a few paragraphs about non-disclosure of certain details related to the property, the discovery, and the terms of the settlement. Legal language that basically said, "Don't go making a spectacle and tying us to it." I initialed where my lawyer told me to. I signed where he pointed. Nobody took anything from my truck that day. Nobody searched my rental. Nobody asked if I had any copies of the tapes. They assumed, I think, that I was like most people. That once I got a check, even a small one, I would just want to move on. That I wouldn't risk stirring up trouble again. In a way, they were right. I did move on. At least on the surface. I sold off the materials I could salvage. I paid down as much of the debt as I could. I went back to taking every electrical job I could get, long days of conduit and panel work and service calls. My hands stayed busy, my body stayed tired. My mind mostly stayed away from that clearing, but at night some part of me was still standing in the mud, watching that dark shape tear at the earth. I moved away, eventually. Not far, but far enough that I didn't have to drive past that road much. Willow Creek became a place I used to work near, not a place I lived next to. Life kept happening. Years stacked up. I got older. My back started to complain about ladders. The world moved on to newer scares and newer headlines. The only thing that didn't age, that didn't blur at the edges, was that tape. I didn't watch it often. Once every few years maybe. Enough to make sure my memory hadn't completely invented things. Enough to remind myself I wasn't crazy. Every time I did, I noticed the same details. The way the thing stays just inside and outside the light, like it knows exactly where it is safe from full view. The way it moves when it thinks it's alone versus the one moment it seems aware of us. The way it reacts, not like an animal stumbling on a disturbed carcass, but like a person finding their grave open and empty. And every time, when it comes to that part where it stands in the ruined trench and lifts its head toward the sight, I feel the same twist in my chest. Because I know now what expression goes with that posture. I've seen people look that way at funerals, when they stand at an empty casket or a memorial stone where there's no body. That weird mix of anger and disbelief and bare, stunned hurt, that's what it looked like to me. Not a monster, not a predator, something that loved, something that was gone. And we were the ones who took it away. You want to know why I'm talking now and not back then? Back then, I was just trying to stay afloat. Guys like me don't have much room for being the crazy Bigfoot guy. You get that label, you lose work, then you lose everything that depends on it. And honestly, I was more scared of the people with letterhead than whatever was in those woods. I watched them move in overnight, take control of my land, my permits, that trench. I saw how fast the normal person gets buried under paperwork when they become inconvenient. It took years for me to even understand what happened. It wasn't just seeing something strange. It was finding out there's a whole category of something out there, and the people who decide what's real chose not to tell the rest of us. I still have the tape. I could show it. I probably never will. I've seen what happens when they want something gone. So instead, I'm giving you this story. The rest is on you.